Sometimes we forget why we're here. It's easy to fall off track. These help us remember.
These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Growing up I had a dream, something no one else could see. Tell me what it means when your faith is falling beneath your knees and you can't breathe. Everything you see reminds you of what you're not or something you won't be. You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they wanna do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shame. And that's the reason I'm staying up late, trying to find a way to escape the stereotypes this day and age is making me feel like the only way I'll be happy is getting signed to a label and making money through rapping. I wanna share my emotion because this world is attacking the very principle of life that lets the people be happy. If you don't have a reason to breathe, why even live? These battle scars are impressions of everything that it is.
Don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
If I had a voice that reached 100 million people, I'd tell them there's a reason that we're all created equal. Cause some decide to be great and some decide a sequel to an average person's life is simply what they want to be. So you make your decision, all I know is what I'm given. Won't define the life I lead or the way I dwell in existence. I've seen a greater image on the walls of where I'm living, and the words twisted and scripted remind me of something written. Faith is a gift that is given down to the people. If one believes it, one receives it. It's given if it is needed. Don't ever think you're trapped in a life that you never wanted. Your options are infinite, that's some mathematical logic. I'm not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers and these battle scars on my church. Not saying I'm a prophet, I'm speaking for what it's worth. These lyrics define my prayers, these battle scars on my church.
Don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battle scars don't look like they're faded, don't look like they're ever gone away. They ain't never gonna change. These battles.
Whoa, where did my intro go? And this is not the right camera. What happened to my iPhone? Holy crap. Let's see if we could get this going. I just installed the new operating system, Ventura. And yeah, here we go. That's much better. Now, I know this stream is super late and I've got glitter all over my face. I made the mistake of putting on glitter eyeshadow earlier and it's migrated. I'll probably be finding glitter in my booty crack in like 4 days. But wow, this is, and I lost all my scenes. This is crazy. Well, you know, that's what happens when you upgrade. I was trying to get things straightened out. So we're going to just get right into the show. Forget all the fancy graphics. We don't have Bunchy running across the bottom of the screen, but that's okay. I can wing it. If you're new to this channel or you're not new to this channel, please hit subscribe. I would truly appreciate it. And I do ask my friends to go follow me on Rumble because I am anticipating the eventual, and I'm looking over at, like, I had to move my Fritos at the audio monitor to make sure nothing else is messed up. And we're going to get right into the clips. We have some Michael Knowles clips. This is part of a series I've been doing that has been leading up. I know I keep teasing this, but I am going to be critiquing the report card of the classical liberal caucus. And boy, am I glad it's taken me a while, because the crap that they pulled today, like, it really is mask off. I've never seen such divisive people who pretend like they're calling for unity. I'm just going to call it as I see it. It's been mask off. In the beginning, I just basically thought, and this obviously isn't everybody, there are lots of great people in every group. I'm talking about certain key leadership figures, and not all of them, because I'm going to name somebody I love, Layla Bush, love her. So we're gonna praise by name and try not, and just be vague with other things. But in the beginning, I thought, well, these, it's just some good faith people who legitimately want unity that I just happen to disagree with some issues on. I no longer believe that. Of the key drivers and certainly the key Twitterers, after one day, a controversy in Colorado where we here are working it out amongst ourselves, where you couldn't give a state party some breathing room, and overnight you're like the crazy cat in your keyboard and you're calling to disaffiliate a whole state. That's garbage behavior. It's bad, and you should feel bad about yourself. But let's continue with Michael Knowles, speaking of bad and should feel bad of himself. But the lead up to this was, before I went off on that rant, and will somebody, if you're watching on YouTube, throw a comment, because I am, with the software upgrade, want to make sure my comments are still working. I guess I won't know. I'll know if I see a comment, but if I don't see a comment, I guess I won't know. You could shoot me a private message on Facebook, and then I'll know later that they weren't working. Because I do see likes. I see that people are watching. But the point of this video is to show, building upon past videos where I had made the argument of the difference, the philosophical foundational differences, even though there is huge overlap between libertarianism and classical liberalism. Went on to talk about how this country was founded on classical liberal principles, and the fact that there really is no brakes on that thing once you allow for a state that can do things that are basically coercive, such as coercive social safety nets. I see the comments are working. Thank you so much. Or you make your first priority the good of society rather than being strictly individual focused. I went into all of this, and yes, sorry to my minarchist brethren, I do think more tyranny is inevitable with minarchy as well. It will just take longer than if you're starting with a classical liberal base. To me, it accelerates quite rapidly when you're talking about a classical liberal base. So the last show I did was on Chekhov's gun. So we left off with the fact that the pistol is on the wall and someone, or on the table, in the example I use, though, in Chekhov's gun, it's actually a pistol on the wall, but I said the gun on the table. And the minute you put the government gun on the table, someone is going to pick it up and use it, even if it's just to pick it up and use it before you can pick it up and use it. Would highly recommend that you go back and at least watch that video. And that's the stage of the story we're at. Everyone has, starting from the New Deal on, when people realized, they can just vote themselves more money, and the tyranny of democracy is rearing its ugly head. Then toleration gets turned on its head, because toleration is good, but then it gets turned onto its head to forced acceptance and forced celebration, which is exactly the point in the story where we are at. Toleration isn't simply enough. You have to celebrate. You have to accept. And we, even as libertarians, have gotten to the point where if you're not just all lifestyles are fine as long as you're not harming anyone. Not just fine in the sense of shouldn't be illegal, because I think all libertarians would agree on that. But no, you have to say it's good. Now, me personally, I've often said I'm a flaming libertine. I don't have much problem with saying most things that some other people would be uncomfortable with or saying is good. I'm not a social conservative by any remote stretch of the imagination. But you can be a social conservative. We're not talking about using state force. We're talking about personal preferences, and be a perfectly fine libertarian. You have every right to say, let's just take myself as an example. You know, mouthy women with pink hair, I don't think that's right. I think you look crazy walking around with pink hair. I think you're obnoxious. I think you don't know your place. Whatever it might be. Women belong in the home. Pick any group that you want. How dare you not have children? Whatever. You want to know what? You can have that opinion and be a perfectly fine libertarian. Doesn't mean I will want to hang out with you. But there's nothing unlibertarian about saying, you want to know what? It shouldn't be illegal to have pink hair, but I think it's completely stupid. It shouldn't be illegal to be a mouthy, foul-mouthed, aggressive female on Twitter, but it shouldn't be illegal. And there's nothing wrong with having these preferences. But the fact is, today, no, that's just not acceptable. And we get to the point where, worse not to say, not only is it not acceptable, for some groups, it's hate speech, and you could be punished with the force of the law. And when you start doing that, your targets will say, how can I get that gun? And I think such and such is bad. And once I get the gun, I'm going to outlaw such and such, just like you outlawed my speech. It's the vicious cycle of putting someone down, and then when that person, the Ferris wheel goes round and they're back on top, they're going to boot stomp you even harder. The formerly oppressed are the worst oppressors. And then the ones that they're oppressing, as I said, and the circle goes round and round. So, this is where we're at. Are you following along with your bingo cards? Because this is where we're at. We're at the inevitable rise of the authoritarian right. You're going to shove your social norms down people's throat and start to use the force of the law on that. You are enabling people like Michael Knowles. I lay the rise of the authoritarian right squarely at leftist feet. Now, of course, we could go back further and lay the rise of the leftist boots we have to kiss now at conservatives prior to them. Again, it's an endless circle. The minute you put the power of the state on the table, rather than realizing human beings will devolve into communities of like-minded people. You might not like that, but it's human nature. And as time progresses, I do think people do naturally become more accepting and more tolerant, but you cannot force that. The minute you force it, we start regressing as a society. As I've said, gay acceptance has gone down. It's gone down because of a lot of the forcing some of these really extreme social views down people's throats. We're not progressing. The progressives have made us regressive, ironically enough. So let's get to the first clip and we will talk some more.
Forget about free speech. I don't even care all that much about totally free speech. What I care about is the ability to tell the truth. Those are different things. It's good to
Thank you. Thank you. I didn't realize I got muted there. Sorry about that. Oh, I'll have to say that all again. And I'm going to have to edit that part out. Thank you, Subversive. So it's mask off time. Let's actually, because I will probably edit that part out. Let's start him again from the beginning. And I can start my rant again.
forget about free speech. I don't even care all that much about totally free speech. What I care about is the ability to tell the truth.
Okay, this is where we're going to stop. And I see that I am on sound now. Mask off. Mask off. The alleged Republican, the Party of Liberty, the Authoritarian Right does not care about free speech. And he just admitted it. He said all he cares about is the ability to tell the truth. Well, you want to know what? That's because of the authoritarian left trying to silence people with opinions they don't like and saying you're spreading disinformation rather than things that you just simply disagree with. You get this. Congratulations, the left. This is your spawn. Are you happy with it? But also, this is why I don't kiss Republican ass, because they do not care about liberty. You don't need freedom. If we're just talking about the concept of freedom of speech, to tell the truth. Freedom of speech is there to say unpopular things. But the fact is what Michael Knowles thinks is the truth, whether you agree or not, is unpopular. And that's why he's saying he doesn't really care about freedom of speech, just freedom to tell the truth. And what that means is once people like him are in power, the people who are contrary to him right now, who are suppressing his rights to say what he wishes, he's going to call disinformation and suppress, because freedom of speech is just about freedom to tell the truth. No, it's not, Mr. Knowles. Freedom of speech is freedom to speak your mind, whether or not you think it's the truth or not. Now, I believe in your freedom to say what you want. But no, freedom of speech doesn't simply mean freedom to speak the truth. It means freedom to say unpopular things.
Those are different things. It's good to have free speech, okay, but none of us actually supports total free speech. This is the point.
Oh, none of us. Who's the us? If the us you mean is other Republicans, well, perhaps you're correct. But if the us includes me, no. Yes, I do believe in complete freedom of speech. Now, I'm going to qualify that because I know, some very smooth-brained person's going to come along and go, you're not free to yell fire in a crowded theater. Actually, go read that case because, that's not actually what the current state of the law is. It's an oft-repeated trope. Freedom of speech, I don't even want to call it boundaries because then people go, aha, you agree with them. Freedom of speech, as long as it's actually freedom. And what I mean by that is you're not free to threaten somebody credibly, because that's not freedom. Freedom means the ability to do things that are not actual what a libertarian would define as aggression. You're free to do anything that doesn't literally and actually, well, even literally set the right word, that doesn't actually harm somebody or have an imminent threat of harm. Other than that, which is then you're using aggression, you are completely free to do. You wouldn't say that I don't believe in the freedom to walk down the street if I said, well, you're free to walk down the street kicking somebody along the way. Obviously not. So freedom is always constrained by your obligation not to commit aggression. But other than your obligation not to commit aggression, yes, I believe in completely free speech. I am a radical free speech person. And I noticed something that Dustin, I'm so sorry. I was looking at your last name, Justin, at the same time, and I like blurred it together. It's really late here. I'd like to put this on the screen where Justin had said, I'm free to threaten whomever I want to threaten so long as I'm willing to accept the consequences of them, preparing to evaluate the validity of my threat in their own way. I don't think freedom of speech means that there's no legal consequences to your speech. I don't mean by freedom of speech a mere ability. Anybody who has vocal cords and can put air across those vocal cords they're free in that sense to say anything they want. When I say freedom of speech, I mean freedom from it being illegal, freedom from the force of government in a statist society, rights enforcement, and an anarchist society, that it's freedom from justified force. That's probably the most concise definition I could give. So yes, that does not include credible imminent threats of violence or fraud. Very narrowly, you don't get to harm other people. But other than that, and harm is defined as actual force, not your feels. By your, I don't mean anyone in my comments. I'm meaning that in general. So no, Mr. Knowles, I actually do believe in freedom of speech. And it's not just freedom to say truth as you believe is truth. And no, I don't think there are different truths for different people. I think truth is truth, but often other people disagree on what it is because they're wrong and you're right, or you're right and they're wrong, or you're both wrong, but you both should have the freedom to say it.
In my book, Speechless, Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. Everybody, hello, thank you. That was actually pretty quick today. Every society has taboos and standards and norms. What we want, at the very least, though, is the freedom to tell the truth.
That was nonsensical. And the fact that society having taboos and norms has nothing to do with freedom of speech. Freedom of speech doesn't mean that your neighbor won't frown on what you say. When we're talking about freedom of speech, we're talking about freedom, it not being illegal. But I would extend that slightly. Technically, that's all we're talking about, is that something cannot be illegal. But as a radical free speech person, I think speech is valuable in its own right. And even though we, as autonomous people, can say, I don't want to hear such and such and walk away, or you can boycott such and such, or, you know, there's all kinds of free market activities you should do. I think those should be wielded very, very carefully, that hearing ideas you don't agree with is valuable in its own right, and we should generally, as a society, encourage free and open exchange of ideas, even ideas we do not agree with, or ideas we might not necessarily wish to hear. If I'm not mistaken, and I want to pull this up, I think we put something to that extent in the Colorado platform, but I could be thinking, ooh, and my internet is super slow. I could be thinking about a proposal to convention that never got heard, but I'm going to pull up the Colorado platform here, because I'm pretty sure that we had a really, yes, here we go. So our plank in Colorado for freedom of expression, it borrows from the national plank. So the first part of it you will recognize, and then that last part of it you will recognize. But the middle part you will see is pretty unique to Colorado. We support full freedom of expression and oppose government censorship, regulation, control of technology, or collusion with communications media. Language that is perceived to be offensive to certain groups or individuals is not a cause for any legal action. While private entities have the right to exclude speech, we believe that the practice of government-supported or initiated deplatforming harms the free and open exchange of ideas. And here's where I was getting to. And freedom of speech is valuable in its own right and should be strongly advocated in both public and private spheres. So the rest of it goes on to talk about freedom of religion. But I do think that freedom of speech and being able to hear things you don't agree with is a virtue, in other words. So let's go on to the next one now that we see that, Knowles just believes, that freedom of speech, really all it should be about is the freedom to speak the truth. But then when the government gun's on the table, who defines the truth?
I don't refer to the wokies, the wokesters, the leftists exclusively. Mostly I refer to the libs, because there's a big debate on the right between, is wokeism a betrayal of liberalism, or is wokeism the logical conclusion of liberalism? And not just modern progressive liberalism. There's another big debate on the right, which is modern progressive leftism a betrayal of liberalism, an illiberal kind of liberalism? Or is modern progressive leftism the logical conclusion of liberalism?
Okay, I could see I'm muted again. My God, I keep screwing this up. I wonder if there's a setting here. I'm just going to have to remember this. Each time I change scenes, I'm sorry, the software again. So here's where I'm going to agree that his question is really good. So he asked, is modern leftism, and when he says liberalism, he's talking about classical liberalism. He's talking about the liberalism that of the sort that people say, well, the left is progressive. They're not liberal. And I agree. They're progressive. They're not liberal. But is what happened, this warping and inevitability of the liberal project? And as I've argued in my past videos, I think it is. And I think the answer to that is libertarianism. And I gave my reasons for that in other videos and the distinctions that I'm making, in that you have to take the government gun off the table. So we're going to go to the next clip, and I'm going to have to make a hotkey or something to unmute myself, because I'm figuring out that each time I play a clip, it's muting me, and I have to figure out that programming.
And the more libertarian types, the more classical liberal identifying types, they say the former.
Okay. Don't confuse the two, but Mr. Knowles does confuse the two.
And the conservatives and the traditionalists and the old school right-wingers, we say it's the latter. We say this wokeism stuff, this was always going to be the consequence of liberalism. I mean, just look at transgender.
Okay, he stopped. Now he's going to get into the transgender stuff. I'm not going to argue about that. I'm going to let him speak his mind. Don't get triggered. That's not really what this is about. I'm not intending upon getting in this debate. He's going to say what he's going to say. But I think he's correct. He says, oh, the more libertarian or classical liberal types, conflating the two, will say that this slide into this authoritarian leftism is a betrayal of liberalism. I don't believe that. I believe it's a natural consequence of it, that the type of liberalism that allows for the government gun will always lead to more tyranny. It might not look exactly like today. It might not be inevitable that it takes the form that it takes today, but it will always take that form, because the minute you put that force on the table, someone is going to use it. Now, I'm going to answer something that I actually feel like one day I should cover my Substack, where Justin had said, you used to think the answer to that was libertarianism, and nowadays I see more and more quote-unquote libertarians willing to use the government gun as they quote conquest second law. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I will always say when I'm ignorant of something, I have no idea what conquest second law is. Let's look that up so I can not say something dumb in response to what you're saying, because conquest second law, because I think I know what you're saying. I still don't get it. It says the behavior of an organization can best be predicted by assuming it to be controlled by a secret cabal of its enemies. I don't understand that in context of your statement. So I'm going to answer how I understood it, and you can let me know if I'm just confused. Libertarianism in a statist world is not a suicide pact. If someone were to break into my house, I would call the government police, because that's all we have to defend ourselves today, because the government has purposely hobbled us. Oh, that's conquest third law. For some reason, Google, maybe you could stick it in chat, Justin. So you have to work within the framework we have now. So if someone is committing fraud, you have to go to the government courts. Or it's a suicide pact. You just let yourself get completely run over. So forced into the system that we have now, where we are working to get rid of it, I do not blame libertarians for availing themselves of the only options that they have now. So I think you and I just probably maybe fundamentally disagree, but let me see. Let me put this up on the screen, because I really had no idea. I've never heard of these laws before. And I know they're not laws in the sense of the government. It's laws like a maxim. Second law, any organization not explicitly and constitutionally right-wing will sooner or later become left-wing. I'll have to ponder that, but I don't see how that has much to do with the government. So I'll I'll think about that because I'm not really sure how that related to your statement. So I don't want to say something just to say something because I'm not so sure I understand. And I'm thinking about it a little bit. An organization, what about an organization? Like, to me, it doesn't make sense. So couldn't just somebody else say an organization that's not explicitly or constitutionally left-wing will sooner or later become right-wing? I think the minute you have the possibility of using force, you're going to continually flip between the two. That's Pinky's first law. Okay. Okay. So let me put Justin's comment up here. He says, oh, I don't mean libertarians availing themselves of the resources available. Okay, cool. We agree there. I mean seeing them advocate for using force against those they disagree with in growing government and creating new laws. In principle, I agree with you, but I'd like to see a specific example. They put this up. They all of a sudden want to create bans and censorship and prohibitions because things threaten their traditional conservative trad values. Again, I would have to see specific examples. I know the things that seem to come up tend to be things relating, and I know it's often used as an excuse, but I'm going to take people at face value, and the examples that are generally brought up nowadays are things where people are concerned about the welfare of children. Whether we're in a statist society or an anarchist society, I do believe children should be protected. So we might just disagree there, and I might be one of those that you disagree with. Drag queen story hour. I don't think there should be laws against that. No. But say children performing in a hypersexualized way, I do believe in the protection of minors. Do I believe the primary sphere for that is the parents? Of course. Well, and Justin says we need to do it for the children, doesn't fly for gun control. What do you mean by it doesn't fly for gun control? I don't think an 8-year-old should be able to buy a gun. But I don't think adults should be prohibited from buying guns in order to keep them from inadvertently getting in the hands of 8-year-olds. Therefore, I don't think adults should be prohibited from a lot of things, but that doesn't necessarily follow that children shouldn't be allowed to do them. So on that, we might just fundamentally disagree. Do I think people are getting really crazy with how they're going with this stuff? Yes. But I do not find it illegitimate, and I think this would even be the case in a non-statist society, that parents are the guardians of their children, and children have a natural human right to be free from abuse. And I realize that that can be an extraordinarily slippery slope, and we have to be careful because there are, what's interesting, and I think you would agree with me, Justin, is just as quickly as some more conservative people will label things like letting your children get read to by a drag queen as abuse, the left will say teaching your children certain religious values is abuse. So it goes both ways. So let's continue, and I'm going to have to remember to go off mute.
That's their vision of the good. And what do the conservatives say in response to that? Nothing, pretty much. What do conservatives say in response to that? We say, hey, LGBT is great. We love that, but just don't trans the kids for some reason. Even though it's all great, it's all really good. We're fun. Not that there's anything wrong with that. We're so happy about that. But just don't, but for some reason it's bad when you do the T part to a 17-year-old. You got to wait until well, okay, maybe a 7-year-old. When they turn 8, then you can teach it to them in schools. But that part's bad. Or the ones who are a little more serious about it, they'll say, we need to break the T off from the LGB. LGB without the T. I get it. I know. You want to be a nice guy. You've got a gay cousin, and you don't want to offend your gay cousin, even though your gay cousin might very well actually agree with you and the conservatives on this point, but you're afraid of being offensive. You want to be a nice guy. Okay.
So the argument he's getting to, and we're going to have an additional clip, is that somehow it's incoherent to say adults should be permitted to be non-conservative, non-traditional, to be gay, to be any of those things, to be trans, but that somehow it's irrational to say that things that an adult can do children shouldn't do. Children need to be children, and we don't need to be sexualizing children. And it's not irrational to hold both positions, but what is going on, and it's in that video I did with Matt Walsh before, where a lot of these super right-wing authoritarians Matt Walsh openly says, there were certain laws he was trying to get on the books to protect children against pornography, but he openly said that for him, he was using that as a tool to eventually push to prohibit pornography from adults. And that's what's going to happen. The minute you allow that kind of force to be used, it does lead to right-wing authoritarianism, which will then turn around into left-wing authoritarianism.
That's a consequence of liberalism, this flattening liberalism, which says that we're not born into particular roles and duties, some of which are unchosen, many of which are unchosen, and we have an obligation to them regardless, into certain circumstances, and to community.
Now, I absolutely disagree with everything he just said. I don't think, again, what's interesting is there is a similarity here between the classical liberal thought and the right-wing authoritarian thought here, in that they each have their vision of this ideal societal unit. And in Michael Knowles' societal unit, people are born and destined for certain roles and responsibilities. And men are men and women are women. And, you know, never shall the twain meet. And gay is bad and trans is bad. And anything that's not traditional is bad. Where meanwhile, you'll have the classical liberals saying, well, but we've got to be this cosmopolitan celebrating of everything, and not only should it not be illegal, you're a terrible, awful person if you're not celebrating it. These two views are two sides of the same coin, and one leads to the other, leads back to the other, leads back to the other.
That we didn't choose, but we have an obligation to them anyway. That's what the conservatives believe. The liberals just focus on that hyper-individualism. You can do whatever you want, just don't hurt anybody or screw.
Yep, pretty much. But that's libertarians. That is not where the liberals are going. And that is not, as I dealt with in past videos, so I'm not going to revisit the foundation of it, that is not the foundation of classical liberalism either. Classical liberalism focused more on the good of society, not this very individualistic non-aggression principle. That's a libertarian view.
For the horses. Okay, well, that's what the liberals say, but that liberalism is going to inevitably lead you to wokeism.
Only if you have the government gun on the table. If you don't, it might lead to some kind of, dare I say it, leftist Hoppian type of their own little communities. But as long as you don't have the government gun on the table, you have preserved freedom.
And what Trump is saying here is that term, I don't know, you just want to avoid it. You just want to avoid talking about how liberalism is bad, but I'm not going to. And so what does Trump say? He says it's not just that the crazy trans stuff is bad, it's that free trade can be bad.
He's saying it is such the mirror image. It is such the mirror image. So things that you should be able to be free to do could be bad, therefore should be illegal. And the mirror image is, well, we've got to be so liberal and accepting that you're just a bad, evil person if you're not celebrating rather than just tolerating.
It's not just that the crazy trans stuff is bad, it's that the free movement of peoples across borders can be very bad. It's not just that the trans stuff is really bad, it's that the upending of all of our traditions, many of which can't be written down on a napkin in some wrap.
Do you think they were handed down? Well, you might, on tablets of stone to Moses from God. I mean, you're Catholic, some of them, you probably would. But tradition is just something that people have done a bunch of times. It very well can be healthy and nice and good. But conserving tradition just for the sake of conserving tradition, no, that is not something that should be enforced. Just like the fact that we should be tolerant of people's non-aggressive choices, no, celebration should not be enforced. And that is one reason why I do say free speech is a good in its own right, because it curbs that very hideous mob mentality that no matter what side of the spectrum you're on, if you're still stuck in the left-right, is just natural for humans will devolve into that mob mentality. But if you generate a healthy respect for free speech, that helps to curb that more vicious, insidious, dark nature we have. That exists equally on the left and the right. It exists equally on people who are socially conservative and people that are socially liberal.
Treatise. The upending of our saluting the flag and having hot dogs on the 4th of July.
So there's something like, oh my God, we're not going to eat hot dogs on the 4th of July. You want to know what? I'm sorry, Michael. Not sorry if this is going to really upset you, but I don't care about eating hot dogs on the 4th of July. I actually, patriotism is idolatry. At least the way we tend to do it in this country. But traditions change. Yes, sometimes traditions do get upended. Tradition for tradition's sake is no better than, oh, it's June, so we have to put a rainbow flag up for its own sake. The left has its own version of its sacred rituals and traditions that we must preserve, and it must be enshrined in law, and it must be displayed on the White House, and the president must say it's our kids. They're mirror images of each other, the left and the right. Two sides of the same coin.
Lie and just doing things the way we used to do them because of sheer tradition and prejudice. Prejudice in the good sense of that word. We just kind of do it out of a prejudgment, out of a gut instinct. That rationalism is bad too.
You want to know what? If that's the life you want to lead, Michael, go for it. Go for it voluntarily in voluntary communities. But the fact is, you want to make this into law. You want to use force against other people, just like the left does. And how did we get here when we were founded on classical liberal principles? Because again, it's mission creep. There's no brakes on this thing. Now, it took several hundred years. It isn't instantaneous. But states ultimately collapse on themselves in this manner. And the only way to prevent that is to have a dictator. But then you suffer in other ways and you aren't free. None of them is freedom.
When you live in revolutionary times, then the way you're going to make political change is to appeal to a minority of people. At all times, it is a minority of people who make revolutionary change. Think of the Bolsheviks who dishonestly presented themselves as a majority. They were a distinct minority of people.
Okay, so these are just a few clips to just give somewhat of a taste of where the authoritarian right is coming from. But I thought the last clip was very interesting because it's true. And that gives me hope for actual freedom. The fact is, I said this like 4 years ago on Facebook. I said, the problem is most people hate freedom and they want to force you to hate it as much as they do. And I think that's true even more so today. The idea that most people want to be free, I don't think is true. I think most people are kind of happy with some force as long as they're the ones wielding it against other people. Which is why, again, I've become very enamored and supportive of the idea of secession down to the individual. I think the Free State Project is a wonderful thing, and that you need to find like-minded people and try to concentrate in a certain area in order to make change for freedom in your life and allow people who do not wish to be free to be not free in their own ways. And I absolutely disagree with you, John M. I am a live and let live person. The only reason it's a failure is because you put the state in the middle of it, because there is no live and let live the minute you allow for the potential of using the alleged justified force of government to force your views on others. Live and let live can only work in a truly voluntary society. So, a great house, you could have great schematics, an architect designed it beautifully, but if you build it on the shifting sand, it's going to collapse. And it's not the house's fault, It's where you stuck it. And if you try to build a philosophy that depends upon voluntary interactions and learning how to find solutions that don't involve force, if you build it on a system that at its very nature requires force, it can't succeed, because it's like mixing oil and water. So that is going to be that's going to be it for this evening. I was going to do another thing, and the funny thing is, you know what? I might download it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to end this clip this show for this evening, but I'm going to come live almost immediately. And I'll probably end up doing, no, you know what? Forget about it, because I don't have a thumbnail prepared. There was a debate the other day with Mike Termont and Vaush. And there was just one clip that I wanted to do a rebuttal to. You know, not everybody is on their A game every step of the way. There are times when people come at me with questions that I would have an answer to like that the next day, but for some reason, I'm thinking about something else. I'm thinking about my back hurts, my butt hurts, my foot hurts, I didn't get enough sleep last night, and I get caught flat-footed on a question. Well, there is a question where Vouch caught Mike a little flat-footed. Oh, no, Mike's not perfect. But Vaush's smug little commie just like, ooh, got the Libertarian, just annoyed the daylights out of me. So I'm going to play this clip, and I'm going to give, and I'm not going to do it tonight, but tomorrow probably, if I have time, a good Libertarian answer to it. And it's not that I don't think Mike could have done it. He just got caught off guard for whatever reason on the show. I'm not going to tear down a fellow Libertarian because they weren't perfect every step of the way. I have a feeling he went into that debate, however, underestimating Vaush and not really knowing who Vaush was. And you have to be very prepared for those specific kinds of debates. Going to interact with comments a little bit. John, we just fundamentally disagree. I'm going to put this up here, and I'm going to interact with this because it's comments I get a lot. And trying to demonstrate here that free speech is valuable in its own right. So going to interact with your free speech on things I don't agree with. The definition of society is the imposition of a set of values. No, imposition implies force. Force is the opposite of society. Society is human beings living in peaceful cooperation with each other. Those human beings will evolve a set of values, or they will come together because they already have a shared set of values. But those values are not imposed. The minute you have imposition, you are not talking about society. You are talking about force. You are talking about coercion. Society, to me, implies civilized. Force is the exact opposite of civilized. Force is brutish. Force is uncivilized. Force is the resort of animals, not evolved human beings. Now, that doesn't mean there is no values. It just means they aren't imposed. Values are inevitable. Different values are inevitable. To claim that there's some sacred society that needs a shared set of values across such a huge expanse of different cultures and time zones and environments as the United States is just freaking crazy pants. and a free and voluntary society, and I mean society in the broader sense, humankind, human beings living in proximity to each other, they will cluster amongst already shared values. The minute you start imposing them, that's the exact opposite of civilization. So I think that is probably going to be it with this. And so Justin said, you see, might get caught off guard more often. I don't know. I've been to a lot of conventions. Maybe it's because he's answering questions from libertarians, and I don't watch that many interviews. As you notice, I don't do many on my show. I like doing interviews from people that's just like ordinary. Speaking of just ordinary, everyday people, I'm going to be doing an interview on Saturday with just one of my listeners who came from overseas, would like to talk about their experiences on like what life was like living in another country, why they came to this country, their journey to libertarianism. And on that, John, I would agree with you that values are reinforced or values are propagated through social means, traditions, and norms. I agree with you there, and that's inevitable. But that has nothing to do with live and let live, which is a value. And that value as well is reinforced through social mechanisms, traditions, and norms. You have not rebutted live and let live. You're just advocating for a different value. And if you're not enforcing it through government, you have to let other people live. And I don't mean that in this strict way. I'm not saying that you would advocate murdering anybody. What I mean by you'd have to let them live, I mean a non-conforming person could just say, I don't care about your social mechanisms. Live and let live goes in a dual direction. Me saying you need to let someone live in a way that you don't approve of also entails you get to still not approve of it and act socially accordingly by not associating with them, perhaps not choosing to do business with them. And then maybe through their own rational faculties will say, you know what, this thing I'm doing, I would rather have the social interaction with these people who will only want to interact with me if I don't do this. So that is natural human interaction. Now, do I encourage that sort of thing? No, I encourage toleration. But a society will form around social norms. Agreed. Take the government gun off the table. And I do think if you have some fictional worlds where you have these clusters of people with different values, I do believe in the upward trajectory of human social evolution to be more accepting, more cosmopolitan, and more egalitarian. I know a lot of people will not agree with me, and that's fine. That's just my particular point of view. And there will always be more old-fashioned, traditionalists, whatever you'd like to, more rigid, more trad, however we want to define it. There will always be pockets of that. But I think the upward trajectory of humanity is towards more toleration. Yes, live and let live is a value. It's the highest value. It's not a vacuum of values. In fact, the only reason that I can say I'm okay with you having some kind of trad world is because I'm willing to live and let live. But that is a reciprocal value. The only truly way that you can have social mechanisms, traditions, and norms, and not through government, is through live and let live. Because otherwise you're going to have to use force, because people will buck those social mechanisms, traditions, and norms. And then what? You're going to have to either let them live, and the minute you enter into that, which is a voluntary arrangement, that's live and let live. Live and let live does not mean you can't have a personal judgment. Because again, of the reciprocity, allowing you to have a personal judgment is me letting you live. It doesn't just go one way. It goes both ways. It's the ultimate and highest of human values. Okay, everyone, I am getting exhausted. Need to go check some emails. This new, I'm like I'm not a boomer, but I'm like so almost a boomer. It's not funny. I'm like going, why did I upgrade my operating system? But hopefully I'll be able to talk to you guys tomorrow. I do have a bylaws meeting, so maybe not. But I'm glad I was able to stream tonight. And Justin, it's been a while since I'd seen you. Did I ask you are you going to be at Pork Fest? Because if you're going to be at Pork Fest, I'll see you there. If not, boo hiss. I'll be leaving in exactly 1 week. So I'm not going to be there starting Monday, but I will be there starting Wednesday. All right, everyone. I hope you have an awesome night. Bye-bye.
Given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians, or choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business, not because they want to